everyone, it's Caroline Yabantu from the LPDS English team here. I'm here today to talk all about the wonderful world of story time. Those precious moments that we spend with children, getting their full engagement and being able to delve into the wonderful world of shared reading. We're going to have a look today at the lovely new document, the Reading Framework, which some of you may know came out in July. There's lots of amazing information in there, some super research, all about the way that children learn to read and teaching those foundations of early reading. We're going to delve in today to section 2 on language comprehension and have a look at that world of story time. There may be lots of pleasurable times that you read to children in class, maybe during shared reading or through story time, hopefully at the end of the day or at those precious times just before lunch, where we gather together and children sit listening agog to the wonderful person reading the book, who's engaging and enthralling, whether it be a parent, whether it be a teaching assistant, or you as the teacher. It does say here, a lovely quote from the Reading Framework, stories aren't just fun. They're an amazing way to develop children's cognition. They're easy to listen to, understand and remember. They're an opportunity to gain the children's undivided attention. So we must remember that although story time is really pleasurable and really fun for children, we are developing those early comprehension skills. So how do we do it? What is story time? As we said, it is a wonderful experience. It's where children are listening to you as the reader read a quality text to them being read aloud with lots of intonation, volume, expression, getting into roles as the character. You've got to make it a really lively experience for children so that they can believe that they can become true readers too. It could be an adult in class, a teacher, it could be a teaching assistant, or we try and engage parents at home, don't we, to read to the children or with the children. Lots of the books, as you probably know, children want to often pick up again. Oh, can we read that one again? That's my favourite. My son used to like this one, Stick Man, and we used to read it again and again and again, purely for enjoyment. But as we are reading for enjoyment, we are trying to develop those comprehension skills. So it's an opportunity for children to imagine themselves as the character in the text. Maybe it's a superhero, or maybe a child wandering and adventuring through the woods. It's also an instance to learn about how other people's lives can be different from their own. So developing different experiences and understanding how other children and other people around the world have different experiences for those that they're living. And as it says in the document, a lovely quote here, it's an opportunity for an adult to breathe life into words and promote the love of reading. So it's an engaging way of getting children to love language, love new vocabulary and explore it, but also to show them that what a wonderful world of reading really is, so that they can love it too. What we've got to think about in class is thinking about mapping out our text. So we're choosing the right ones to engage our children and to develop those comprehension skills. So it's that careful consideration of which text we're going to choose across the year. Lots of you I know do something called curriculum mapping, and that might be very well linked to themes, or it can move on in the early years linked to children's interests. But it's making sure that we've got an idea of where we're going with our books and which ones we're going to choose, which ones will develop comprehension well, which ones can we explore the character's thoughts and feelings and look at that vocabulary as we go. Alongside those core texts, we will also be reading for pleasure, maybe at the end of the day or just before lunch, to also expand the children's understanding of text. We can also call these linked text. So you may carefully consider mapping out your books, your core text, and then finding others that have a similar theme to read for pleasure alongside. Obviously, we've talked about children loving reading and wanting to read the books again and again, and that's completely and utterly natural. We know that children do develop language and they start hearing those refrains and phrases. So, for example, if we're reading Superworm by Julia Donaldson, children might start joining in with watching wiggle, watching squirm, hip hip hooray for Superworm. they might join in once they've heard that story again and again. Books with repetitive pattern language are key so that children can hear the same kind of spiel again and again, and then ultimately want to join in. We've also got to remember having a balanced selection of text. So not just fiction books or non-fiction books. And of course, poems, songs and rhymes also do a really good job of developing that comprehension. Lots of children in your class might prefer a non-fiction book, but how often do we go at the end of the day and say, choose a story? What story are we going to read today? And actually, maybe some of the boys would prefer a non-fiction book to be read to them at the end of the day to engage them. It might be a book about the deadliest creatures or sharks. So consider picking up a non-fiction book to read to children too. Thinking about books which reflect different backgrounds and other cultures that are slightly different from their own, so you're exposing children to the wider world. Thinking about books which promote new vocabulary. Are your books challenging enough for children to hear? Is the language in them going to hopefully engage them and hopefully be able for children to be able to use themselves at a later date? Thinking about books which are humorous and elicit a strong response. So things like books which elicit empathy or humour or curiosity. One of my favourite books is Nobot the Robot with No Bottom. And straight away, the title of that one makes us laugh. Thinking about stories from around the world, which are both traditional and modern. So ones that we've always read, you might have picked up Oliver's Vegetables a few times in the years gone by, but it's a favourite of theirs, The Hungry Caterpillar, for example. But considering new books and new titles and a range of them and popping those into your book corners. How do we actually do story time then? You've got to be enthusiastic, haven't you? You've really got to be that person who engages children with your voice, good intonation, tone and volume, making your voice go deep if it's spooky, or making it go squeaky if you're going to be a mouse. Thinking about things like reinforcing memorable words or phrases for children to join in with. You might have a microphone and you might say to children, oh, I'm going to be the character of this book. We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. I'm not scared. Can you repeat that? So get the children joining in with that copycat reading or choral reading so children feel a part of the text and feel like they're becoming a reader too. Repeating stories, which would deepen their familiarity and emotional engagement, will create a sense of comfort. So it's a comfort moment for children to explore those characters and emotions again and again. Thinking about children joining in. So we've already said joining in with choral reading or copycat reading, but then obviously getting them on the feet and acting out. As you're going through the leaves of the bear hunt, swishy, 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 swishy. Or if you're going to be Superworm, let's all stand up and say our refrain. Superworm is super long, Superworm is super strong. Watch him wriggle, watch him squirm. Hip hip hooray for Superworm. So joining in as we go along with actions to remember certain parts. As children build up that story language, we can start abridging stories for them, creating story maps and getting children to perhaps learn story maps from visual images. We can then recreate that with visual story maps with small props so that children can join in independently once they're confident. Thinking about role play and provide time to reflect on characters, thinking about what characters think and what they feel and how they behave during those story times. The other consideration we've got to think about is your book areas, okay? Do you have a book area? Is it something that's beautifully decorated and children enjoy? Has it got fairy lights hanging from it? It's not just about how it's decorated and if it's engaging, it's about crucially how it's used. So within those book areas, we need to make sure We've got quality text. Some books that may be old and tatty we might need to remove and refresh with new ones. We need to think about books being placed in all areas where children go to learn. So if there's boys or children in the construction area, have we got a couple of books there that reflect what their interests are? Thinking about the books that are familiar, so the ones that we've done during shared reading or in story time together, and then popped those into those areas too for children to revisit and go over and maybe become the storyteller themselves. You might have a storytelling chair in your classroom for children to actually become the storyteller and frequently revisit the text that they already know. Think about when you're putting books out, not putting them all out at once, maybe considering which ones you're going to put out and changing them more frequently. So remember, less is more. Children will be more engaged as there's a couple of titles out there in particular areas for them to go and sit and enjoy independently. Make sure the books are forward facing. I remember in my classroom, we used to have to scramble to the back of the book box to choose a book. And actually, when we realised children struggled to A, find the book, and B, wanting to go to the reading area because it was a bit of a task trying to find them. So consider facing the books forward and displaying where they're easy to find and look attractive. Think about the vocabulary that you've explored when you're doing shared reading. You might have pre-taught some vocabulary, or you might have jumped on words when you're reading the text, and you've got the children to repeat them when we're doing that copycat reading, so it's become internalised. Make sure that that vocabulary then goes with your book or in the book areas, so that children can revisit that vocabulary and try and embed it and use it themselves. We want that vocabulary to become sticky, don't we, so that they use it independently. You could pop out simple story maps which have been modelled so children can retell the stories independently themselves. Thinking about things like story baskets and sacks where children can confidently retell the stories with props. So you might find little people like this, like Red Riding Hood, Grandma and the Wolf, just popped in a little story basket or a bag so children can go back to those characters and retell them confidently. But it has to be modelled first, so that quality modelling before children can do it independently. Thinking about different ways in which children will be engaged in reading, maybe considering putting something like a book boat in your class, a couple of book boats, which are really big tubs, and children can sit inside with a nice cushion and sit in the book boat, reading and enjoying their books. Or you might have something like reading pets. Every child in reception might get a reading pet to look after throughout the year, and it's their job to read to their reading pet. So you might have them in school. It might be something that goes home to parents to say how many books you can read to your pet. And it's something that's also comforting to do when you've got a text together with that pet. The other thing is about not just having reading inside. Do we have areas outside where children can enjoy reading? We know obviously sometimes it's raining out there, so how do we get that across in schools? Well, we might have things like reading sheds, which have certain books in that children are familiar with, and nice comfy areas that they can enjoy reading at break times or at lunch times. And as I've already said, you might have something like storytelling chairs, not just for the adult to use, but for the child to become the storyteller themselves. We could make some of those out of logs or tyres outside so children can enjoy becoming the storytelling person. Okay, hopefully you've got a few ideas there. Have a look at the reading framework and the story time section and see if you can come up with anything new yourself. Well, it's bye from me now. See you again next time.